Hey, today we're finishing up the series we've been in, looking at the last discourse, we call it, John 14 through 16, when Jesus is trying to bring comfort and assurance to his disciples. And I want to kind of summarize what we've been spending the last 4 or 5 weeks talking about, and then I want to offer a challenge. But in this final discourse, this last speech to his disciples before Jesus is going to be crucified, he uses this word over and over and over: trouble. He says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." And then at the end of this last discourse, all the way in John 16:33, he uses this word again. He says, "I have told you these things so that you may have peace, because in this world you will have trouble." So he begins with trouble and he ends with trouble. And what I want us to understand this morning, in light of the story I'm going to want to share with you, is that this word trouble that he uses is a severe word. It's a word that brings up a lot of weight and pressure and anxiety. There's many Greek words that could have been used for trouble. There were other Greek words for trouble, but the one used here is a word, again, that is a severe trouble. The word trouble here is reserved for times when there's deep pain and deep anxiety and deep turmoil. This isn't a word that you would use for just sort of the everyday petty frustrations of life, the irritations, the annoyances, and we're familiar with many of those. But this is a word when life is almost unbearable and there's trouble. It's reserved for deep pain. And so I just want to be clear that this is a significant word. This is not a word that's to be used glibly, but Jesus says, don't let your hearts be troubled in this way. He's saying, hey, don't let your hearts keep you up all night when you're worrying about something, when there's an uncertain future. Don't let your heart be torn to pieces because maybe somebody you love betrayed you, or don't let your heart be ripped apart because you get a phone call in the middle of the night with devastating news. Don't let that happen to your heart. Maybe for our situation, don't let your heart be kicked into a bottomless pit when you hear more death statistics, or there's more COVID news, or some depressing new headline. Don't let your heart be troubled. Now, as we've said, that all sounds great, and that's been a theme that we've seen. That sounds great, but it's not really so easy to do. Like, okay, Jesus, I don't want my heart to be troubled. So how do I not let my heart be troubled, weighed down with this intense weight and pressure and worry and anxiety? And so we've said that Jesus has used throughout this another significant word, and it's this word, the word believe. The word believe in John 14, the first 14 verses, the word believe shows up 6 different times. And so this is what Jesus talks about with his closest followers. And when he uses this word belief, remember, it's not an encouragement. Hey, come on, just believe. It's really more of a command. Jesus said, you believe in God. That's awesome. So believe in me. It's a command. It's a command, and I want to make sure that I say this right, because if belief is what keeps us from being troubled, then it's unbelief, I think, that makes us especially troubled. We don't always look at it that way, but if you search Scripture, you'll see that unbelief is oftentimes called a sin. Like it's a lack of belief in the God who made us. And so, as a matter of fact, in John 16, verse 9, it talks about the sin of this world is unbelief. And so this is a very, very serious thing. And so as we end this series facing forward, I want to look at a pivotal Old Testament event where God's people, the Israelites, were faced with the decision. They could either retreat in fear or they could move forward. Even though moving forward was a very uncertain thing, they could move forward with belief and with faith. And so I want us to get a picture of what this looks like in very, very troubling situation. to move forward in faith. And so it comes from Exodus chapter 14. I'm not going to have the scriptures up on the screen. I want you to pick up a Bible out of the pew in front of you, or turn to the app on your phone and go to Exodus 14. But many of you are probably familiar with this story. It's the story of Moses leading God's people out of slavery. And so Moses is used by God to free the people from years of, almost 400 years of horrific slavery in Egypt. And he's going to challenge the people in that chapter to be still, but also to believe that God's going to fight for them. And so he frees them from slavery. Moses with God, God with Moses, they are freed from slavery. They begin to head out. They're on their way right to this thing called the Promised Land, which is the land flowing with milk and honey. It's Canaan. It's where God has for them to grow and flourish and prosper as his people after these years and years of slavery. And they're on their way to the Promised Land. And maybe you know, at least to some degree, the story that Pharaoh initially says, okay, like, all right, you can go. But then he starts to think about it. And he's like, wait a minute. How are we going to make all these bricks? Or we're letting our workforce, right, our free workforce leave. Like, what are we going to do? And so Pharaoh changes his mind, has second thoughts about letting them go, gathers his army together, and they head off after the Israelites who are on their way to Canaan and to the Red Sea. And so it's going to be challenging for the people of God to know what to do. And so Pharaoh catches up. Pharaoh and his army catches up with the Israelites about the time that God's people are reaching the Red Sea. And so this puts them in a very, very awkward, precarious position because the Israelites have the Red Sea in front of them. And then they've got the Pharaoh and his army behind them. And so they're kind of hemmed in. They're feeling troubled. They're feeling hemmed in. And this isn't a good hemmed in. This isn't like, Psalm 139 that Mark read earlier, that we're hemmed in by God. This is hemmed in by an opposing enemy, and they don't know what to do. And so what do they do? What do they do when they are feeling this pressure, when they are feeling this trouble? What do? Well, they do what a lot of us tend to do. They start to complain and they start to criticize and then they start to be negative and they're divisive. And that's what they do. That's what God's people do in the middle of this very, very difficult situation. In fact, in Exodus 14, verse 11, it says that they said to Moses, and I listen to the sarcasm of this. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt, Moses, that you brought us out here to the desert to die? Is that the deal? Was that your plan, that weren't enough graves in Egypt, Moses? So let's all go to the middle of the desert and hey, we'll just all die out here. Was that your plan? And so they're sarcastic, and they start pointing their finger at Moses, the one who is leading them, the one who freed them God did it, but did it through Moses to free them from slavery. And then they have the nerve to say to Moses, hey, Moses, didn't we tell you when we were in Egypt, hey, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? And Moses said, you definitely didn't say that. You didn't say leave us alone. They wanted to be free. They went on to say, hey, it would have been better for us to have the Egyptians to die in Egypt than in the desert. And so they're just hypocritical. They're complaining. They're saying that they didn't say something that they said. And I'm telling you, this is what, I don't know about you. I don't know about those in your circle. I don't know about your friends. I don't know about your family necessarily. But generally speaking, this is what a lot of us tend to do. When we're hemmed in, when we've got pressure before, when we've got pressure behind, we start to let our unbelief sort of take the form of anxiety and criticism, and we lash out, and we're frustrated, and we're divisive, and we're critical, and we're complaining. And so what does Moses do in the light of, and this isn't going to be the last time that they do this, believe me, but what does Moses do here? When he replies to the people, they're just complaining, they're being ungrateful, they're being negative, critical. And if you recall the story, Moses, this wasn't something that he willingly signed up for in the first place. This wasn't his ideal job in life. to lead this complaining, murmuring people through the desert. But this is what he did because God laid this upon him. But Moses doesn't try to argue with them. He doesn't try to reason with them and say, I don't remember you telling me that, but maybe you did, but I just don't know. He doesn't debate with them. He doesn't choose sides. But instead, what he seems to recognize is that their negativity, their criticism, their complaining is coming from a place of unbelief. And the only thing he knows that's going to combat unbelief is to instill in them belief and faith and hope. And so that's what he's going to do. And this comes from a place in me that I just think that we need to make sure as God's people and as a church that we are doing this. Because listen, we are living in a world where there is, at least in my time, unprecedented divisiveness. A lot of opinions, a lot of negativity, a lot of stuff, and it's causing Christians, and it is. It's causing Christians to complain and argue and be divisive and just be nasty and mean to each other, but worst of all, to unbelieving people. And we just cannot do that. We cannot let things divide us as God's people that were never meant to divide us. And so I'm just going to give you a heads up here. A tentative title for a sermon I'm working on, for a series I'm working on for the fall is Separation of Church and Hate. Separation of church and hate, because I really think that we need to really get this message in our mind as we go into October and November, who we are as a church and where we need to come from as God's people. And because we can't do that. We can't allow Satan to use us to divide and complain and argue. And so what Moses does is he speaks hope and faith and courage into them. He's like, hey, stop acting like you're the victim. Stop acting like you are not children of the God who created the heavens and the earth. Stop acting like you're the underdog. You're not the underdog. The God who spoke the heavens into existence is on your side. That is the God that we put faith in. Why are you acting like you're defeated and discouraged and allowing yourselves to get all upset with one another and to divide and to be like this? And so Moses is going to speak that to the people, and he's going to remind them, look, I know it seems like an absolutely impossible situation. The Red Sea in front of you, the Egyptian army behind you, but remember that God fights for you. God fights for you. So I want you to look at this in your Bibles, and please find one if you don't already have one, but Exodus 14:13. Exodus 14:13, it says that Moses answered the people. He said, hey, don't be afraid. Stand firm. See the deliverance that the Lord will bring on you today. Then he goes on to say, hey, the Egyptians you see today, you'll never see them again. The Lord will fight for you. And then he says, you need only to be still. You need only to be still. Now, I'm kind of wondering how he said that. When we're reading the words of the Bible, just like when we're reading an email or a text message or whatever, we don't know the tone of the person. And so I don't imagine Moses telling them this like it's sort of a quiet counseling session where he's like, hey, be still. Like the Lord is fighting for you. Don't worry about it. Everything will turn out okay. I don't think that's his tone. I think it was more like a locker room halftime speech at some important ball game where Moses is trying to get them pumped up, trying to fill them with courage, trying to fill them with faith. And he's like, hey, do not get discouraged because God is with you. God is fighting with you. Let the Lord fight for you. You just be still. Let the Lord fight for you. And I know that as a pastor, I have said that many, many times. Like I have said that to people. Hey, stop your striving and your worrying and your fussing. Just let God fight for you. You just be still. And then I'll pull in Psalm 46. Hey, be still and know that the Lord is God. Just be still. But I want to tell you something. To be honest with you, I've never until recently really paid much attention to the very next verse after he says that. So in verse 14, Moses says, be still, let the Lord fight for you. But then in verse 15, he says, then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell them to keep moving. Like that would be pretty confusing, right? You see what happened? Moses is saying to the people, hey, be still. God's saying, hey, Moses, tell the people to get moving, keep moving. Why are you just sitting there? And I'm sure Moses was like, well, there's this kind of issue of the Red Sea right there, God. But God says, just keep moving forward. And look, this is what belief does for us, because this sounds very contradictory. But what I want to propose to you is it's not. Because what belief does for us is it allows us to be still without being stopped. You understand what I'm saying? It allows us to be still and quiet in our hearts, in our minds. But it doesn't mean that we need to just stop any activity. Belief allows us to be still in our spirit while continuing to move forward with our feet. And I don't know about you, but that is a message that I need in this season of life, that it's not just be still or move forward, but it's be still and move forward. Don't just sit there. Don't just sit there. That I can be still and I can have peace and I can have confidence and my heart can have courage. That the situation before me or the fear coming up behind me, it doesn't have to stop me. It doesn't have to immobilize me. In fact, God would have us to understand that, one of the things that betray belief and faith is that we keep moving forward. And yet I'm convinced that if the Israelites, if they had their way, and I think Moses, if God wouldn't have directly confronted him, the tendency is to just stay paralyzed with fear, to not do anything. And then sometimes we'll kind of justify that by saying, well, it doesn't say in the Bible that we're just to be still, let God fight for you. Well, yeah, but they're not mutually exclusive. We can be still in our hearts and in our minds and our spirits, and yet can still keep moving forward with our feet. So that's what God showed them. He splits the Red Sea. The people walk through it. They have their trouble behind them and before them, but in their hearts, they don't let their hearts be troubled because they believe and they have faith and they do trust in God. And so they face forward with peace in their hearts that God is fighting for them, and they walk into what God is doing in front of them, and they move into the future through the Red Sea. Now, God did not waste that opportunity to teach his children. If only they would have learned their lesson once and for all. But as we know the story, they go wandering through the desert. They're still complaining. They're still griping. And not a whole lot changes. In fact, it actually gets worse. But I would hope that at various times their minds would go back to this event when they were immobilized by fear, when their hearts were heavy with the trouble that was behind them, with the trouble that was before them. And yet God did show them the way, gave them the faith and the courage to move forward. And I guess what I just want to say is your pastor is what Moses essentially said to the people back then. Listen, church, it doesn't matter what happens in the future. It doesn't matter what the next 2 months or 3 months or year holds. We are not going to be characterized by freaking out. We're not going to be people who do that. We're not going to act like we don't have confidence in the God who rules the universe, when we need to have all the confidence. We're not going to act like we have no hope when we have the hope of the world. We're not going to act like we don't know the way forward when we have the light of the world who leads us and guides us and shows us the way. We're not going to act like we don't have light in the darkness when we know who the light of the world is. For going back to John 14, we believe in God and we believe in Jesus. And the reason we can believe in Jesus is because nobody faced a situation that he did. On the cross, died, faced forward, moved forward with confidence and with faith, not unfeeling, not just this stony robotic. I mean, he was in agony over what was happening to him. But all the time he knew that God was with him. He knew that he was moving forward in the exact way that God wanted him to do that. And I just think as a church, we need to make sure that we have our hope, we have our trust, we have our confidence as temporary citizens of this world in the God who is primarily concerned with our attitude in another world. And that doesn't mean that we just pretend that nothing's going on. It doesn't mean that we don't pretend like we aren't in some serious times in this life and in this world. But listen, if we as If we as followers of the God of the universe do not model the way forging forward with faith and with confidence, then who in the world is going to? It's got to be us. And so we've got to put our trust in Jesus Christ. We've got to put our hope in him. We've got to put our confidence in him, regardless of what happens. We've got to understand that it's Jesus who said, hey, don't let your hearts be troubled. Even though it can be really, really troubling. He said, you believe in God, you believe also in me. He spoke that to the disciples before he was resurrected. We know what happened. We know that he was killed on the cross. We know that he was resurrected. We know that he appeared to multiple people over various times and various places. We know that he lives today as his people. And so, church, we cannot forget that. We cannot forget that.